All right, so that's great. Talking to Jordan Cruz right here from Country Roads Webcast. All right, Jordan, let's break down the defensive line a little bit. Let me give you a little scenario. Let's say it's a minute 45 seconds to go in the game. It's 3rd and 7, and the opponent has the ball on the 50-yard line. We need a sack and a stop, right? Who do we have on that line? It's 3rd and 7. They're going to have to pass to try to keep that ball alive and keep going down the field and run the clock out. Who do we have on that line? Edge rushers and just coming in whatever and being able to put some pressure on the quarterback, shake him up, maybe get a sack, lose some yards there. What do you see out of this defensive line?
First name that comes to my head when I'm thinking about this defensive line is Sean Martin. He's going to be a junior this season. He's an in-state guy. And when I talk about Sean Martin on the channel, I always try and shout out that he's, from the same high school I graduated from, although I graduated from there many moons ago as compared to him at Bluefield High School there. But I think that he's ready to factor in as a starter on this defense and be the leader, on that defensive unit at the front part there. I think West Virginia has a player at each level that's going to be a great leader for this defense. And if I'm talking on the defensive line, that player is Sean Martin. I'll talk more about who that player is at the linebacker level and at the secondary as we go through here. But to me, Sean Martin's probably the de facto leader of this defensive line. Great size, 6'6", 290 plus pounds, and he's ready to take over, I think, as a premier player on that line. But in addition to him, I think West Virginia's brought in some really good pieces via transfer this offseason that are going to help in those pass rushing situations you're talking about, and even in run stopping situations as well. And the player that's really stood out to me the most that is one of those transfers, and you've heard coaching staff rave about him as well as media personalities alike throughout spring practice, and that's Davon Hawkins, better known as Day Hawkins, a transfer coming in from Tennessee State. He made plays all throughout spring practice, and then in the spring game, we got to see him do it ourselves. And I think if I'm going to compare him to somebody, I think West Virginia fans would be probably excited to hear me compare him to a Darius Stills. I think he's kind of got a similar type of body frame, a little bit shorter, maybe a bit undersized for that defensive line, some would say, but has an incredible motor just like Darius Stills had. And we saw the success that Darius had. So I think Day Hawkins, in my opinion, is probably the transfer that's flying the most under the radar for West Virginia this offseason, just because of the fact some people seen him come from Tennessee State. They see that Division II name. They kind of, stiff their nose up at that a little bit. But I think Day Hawkins is going to be a great player for West Virginia this season on that defensive line. So those are two names that stand out to me on that defensive line. But then you're going to have some other factors, of course. Eddie V, I think, is going to factor in at the defensive tackle position. I think the aforementioned Day Hawkins and him will do a great job, and the combination of those two will probably fulfill what you lost with the loss of Jordan Jefferson leaving to LSU. But then let's not forget about some young guys that West Virginia has that could factor in on that defensive line. I'm thinking of Sonny Redwood, who came in last season, racked up a ton of sacks his senior season in high school, put on 80 pounds here at West Virginia, and now is ready to factor in probably more as a defensive tackle. And then you got Zakai Lawton, who came over from Cincinnati as a transfer, in-state recruit out of high school, went to Cincinnati originally, came to West Virginia, didn't play a lot last season, but now I think he's ready to maybe have a bit of a role. And then you got a legacy guy like Jalen Thornton, the son of the great John Thornton, who's probably ready to have a role on this defense. And Taurus Simmons, who came back and is going to play defensive end for West Virginia, entered the transfer portal throughout the offseason, but decided to come back to West Virginia ultimately. Think that that's a good decision on his part. And then, like I said, we're talking about transfers. Tamiwa Duraje is one West Virginia got from Kentucky that's going to help off the edge, as well as Braden Dudley coming in as a transfer as well. Redshirt freshman Duraje, redshirt sophomore is Braden Dudley. And then along that defensive line, you're talking about some bigger guys there. If you're talking about the nose tackle, West Virginia has Mike Lockhart, who came in last season. I think he's going to play a bigger role this year as a transfer in from Georgia Tech. And then some other bodies there for Turma Mulba coming in as a transfer from Penn State. Hammond Russell is a recruit that this coaching staff brought in, so probably ready to play a bigger role this season. And then Corey McIntyre Jr. just recently joined the roster as a true freshman for West Virginia. Of course, another legacy player there. His dad was a great fullback there in the NFL for the Cincinnati Bengals, among other teams. So those are some of the names, just a long list there that can contribute along the defensive line, in my opinion. But if I'm looking at kind of the top names there, I think at defensive end, you're looking at Sean Martin and probably Braden Dudley and Duraje. with Torres Simmons and Thornton maybe factoring in there as well if Thornton can get healthy. And then I think defensive tackle, you're factoring in Eddie V, Day Hawkins, Asani Redwood, whereas at nose tackle, you're going to see Mike Lockhart, Hammond Russell, and Zakai Lawton if you're talking about a two deep there kind of along the defensive line, in my opinion, at this point.